Okay, this is the second time I recorded this video about the average person is very poor. First time didn't work the volume, there were some complaints on YouTube, so I'll do it again. Okay, let's get started. The median household income has been growing nominally during the last 5 years. So I pulled the data from between 2019 and 2024 from the internet using ChatGPT 4.0. On the Finxter channel, we have a lot of videos showing you how you can use ChatGPT 4.0 for finance, and it's really a powerful tool. And I pulled the data online from there and obtained this yellow chart. This yellow chart shows that the median household income in the US has been growing slightly from roughly 70K, actually 69K or so of all numbers, to 76K. And so there was some growth in the last 5 years, but there was also a lot of monetary debasement. And I always use monetary debasement as a proxy for inflation. I don't use and I don't trust the official inflation numbers. Why? Because to calculate the inflation, they determine the products they put into the basket of inflation. The products, they have been removing products that became much more expensive. So they can basically produce any inflation number they want by putting the right products into the basket. And they have been doing so. They have been sharing inflation numbers based on except energy, except housing and stuff, right? And this is like not a fair way to calculate inflation. If you do the research, you will find out yourself that the official inflation numbers are actually huge underestimation of the real inflation numbers. And the best way, in my opinion, to as a proxy, because it cannot be easily manipulated, is to measure the money supply. The money supply is like it's called M2 sometimes in the US. For instance, it shows how much monetary units there are in the system, and if they create new monetary units, it shows up in the money supply. And and we have been growing money supply significantly, like roughly 10% or so every year, maybe 9% or so every year on average during the last 5 years. So this is a rough number. I don't have the numbers in the back of my hand, but I had it here in ChatGPT to produce this chart, and I normalized this orange line by the money supply, right? So for instance, here in the year 2020, if you still made 70K, you actually don't make 70K of 2019's purchasing power. You made 55K in 2019 purchasing power by normalizing through the money supply. And then it has been remained relatively constant. So we have produced a lot of monetary units in 2020 and then remained roughly the same, but we still keep increasing the monetary supply. On an average, if you look at 10-year, 20-year, 30-year history or so, you will see that monetary supply usually expands between 8 and 10% per year. Okay, anyway, so by normalizing these numbers, you can see that the real income, the real median household income, adjusted for monetary debasement, so we can calculate the purchasing power, has been reduced by 20%. So if you have liquidity problems now, it might be because of this. If you have been able to save 20% of your income in 2019, but you cannot do this anymore in 2024, this might be the reason for it, right? So the median household income has actually increased and has reduced the purchasing power of the households. Similarly, if you're a new job entrant, it has been relatively the same, right? 20% less, making 20% less right off the box. Maybe you make a better nominal value than 2019, but the purchasing power has been eroded since then. On the other hand, so this was the income part, right? Income is like struggling, has been reduced in purchasing power by 20% when normalizing with the M2 money supply. The average annual household expense today in 2024 is 61K, so a significant number. It's like 5K and something on a monthly basis in order to maintain your household, and usually use 33% on housing, 15% on transportation, 11% on food, 8% on utilities, 8% on healthcare, 4% on entertainment, 11% in insurance, other expenses 7%. So it's difficult, right, to squeeze savings there, but it's definitely possible to increase your savings rate, but it has become more difficult. And we see this the average savings rate actually dropped to 3%. It historically has been at twice that number, to say 6 or 7%, even higher at almost 9% in 2018, and it has been spiking it has spiked for a short period of time, but then came down to earth. And this is actually, when we generated a lot of new monetary units, of course we could save more for a short period of time, but then inflation kicks in, right? And you see the chart is going down, the savings rate is going down, we are getting squeezed out. The real purchasing power is getting squeezed out, and actually the savings rate has reduced in the long term. So there's always like an effect, a cause and effect. Like the cause is creating more monetary units, the effect is reducing the savings rate of the average American. So based on this, an unfortunate truth is that the average person will never be financially free. Why is that? So if you take this 3% average income and we even put it into an aggressive 100% stock portfolio of S&P 500, we might get a 9% annual return. So this is like the average return of the S&P 500. You put your money into an ETF every single month. You dollar cost average into the ETF shares, and you get a 9% annualized return. Your investment in this scenario in 20 years. Like almost a lifetime of work, right, would grow only to 120K, roughly. And this is the nominal value, right? It would grow nominally to 120K, but in 20 years we might have seen, like every 8 years or so, the purchasing power decreases by half. This is due to the 8 to 9% debasement rate, right? If you calculate it, 8 to 9 debasement rate, you use the rule of 72, so you divide 72 by, say, 8, and you get something like, I don't know, maybe 9 or so, yeah? So you get something like 9, and I think it's exactly 9, right? So after 9 years, you actually have halved your purchasing power. And in 20 years, you have halved your purchasing power twice. Right, so the 120K in real terms, normalized by the debasement rate, is actually 120K half once is 60K, half twice is 30K. So your nest egg would be worth, like in purchasing power, would be worth like 30K or so after 20 years, which is kind of a joke, right? With 30K, you can't survive even a year. So you are so far from being financially independent, it's almost comically funny, right? And now, unfortunately, it is getting worse. It's really not funny, but it's a cold hard truth. It's getting worse. So the debt clock, if you're in the US or similar economies, most economies actually have a debt burden. If you're in the US, the US has like 35 trillion US dollars in debt. So it's 35,000 billion. USD in debt. So if you calculate it per citizen, so you divide by 200 million, or I don't even know the number of citizens in the US, you get a number like $103,000, which would be completely, even if you did this your lifetime of investing, right, aggressively, 100% stock portfolio, you could just pay the debt, because eventually the citizens need to pay the debt, right, one way or the other, via inflation or via tax or whatever. And if you calculate per taxpayer, so if you are the working person in your family, you are the only taxpayer, so it's actually 266K in debt. So you are already the minus 266K, and then add your net income, which on average for the US citizen doesn't look very pretty. And it even worse, the interest on this debt on an annual basis is 17K per adult. So if you're an adult, usually in a family you have 2 adults, but okay, let's go with 1 adult first. Your savings rate is 3% on average of 75K, so we get to 2K savings annualized. So every year you might put 2K or so as a savings, and probably you don't invest all, probably you leave it as cash or so initially, so it's even worse. But okay, so say you invest 2K every year. Now the interest that needs to be paid per adult in the US just for the debt burden is 17K. Of course, there are some indirect ways of pulling the number from you. So there are some people stupid enough to leave these 2K on their account on their, like, as cash in the cash accounts. So those people will actually pay even more interest relatively per adult, because they will just lose purchasing power every single year. So they might have 200k or a million on their bank account, and then basically they take 17k of purchasing power from those people every single year, probably more. So if you calculate savings minus interest, it's like minus 15k per year. So this is kind of the sad truth. On average, persons make negative 15k in the US every single year. Good, so this is not a way to become financially free. And now the situation is getting worse. Because of the huge debasement we have, a lot of money flees into housing, into real estate, because real estate is seen as a store of value, right? So you buy real estate, you store your wealth in real estate. So rich people buy real estate because real estate cannot be as easily based as fiat currencies, as US dollar, for instance. That's why they buy real estate, to maintain their purchasing power, because real estate historically has maintained the purchasing power pretty well. And I found this chart, this data, that shows on the x-axis the years from 1960 to 2024, roughly, and we see on the y-axis the home price divided by the median household income ratio. So what this shows is basically the number of years you would have to work in order to purchase your house outright. Exclusively work to purchase your house outright. So if you work like in the 1970s, you would have to work 3.7 years, like full work, or everything you make at work for 3.7 years would be put into the house, and then you would own your house, right? So it's like doable. It's still a lot to ask, right? If you like 4 years exclusively, because usually you cannot work 4 years exclusively. So you can maybe set aside 10% of your income for to pay for the house or so, or maybe 20% of your income to pay for your house, which means that you need to multiply this number by at least 5, more realistically 10. So you would 4 times 5 is 20, so it would take you 20 years or to 40 years in order to pay back your house, and this doesn't even account for interest. But now in 2007 or 8, we have seen the housing bubble. It has become worse, right? So you would have to work almost 7 years, 6.8 years or so to purchase a house on average. So if you multiply 6.8 with 10, assuming you can pay 10% of your paycheck for the house every single year, you would have to work 68 years just to pay back your house, not accounting the interest expenses that you would have to pay additionally. And and then it crashed, obviously, and housing became more affordable in 2011. It was like the best case scenario, right? So you wouldn't have to work very long in 2011, like 5 years again. It looked as if it normalizes again. But then it began to rise, and in 2020 we have seen all rich people flew into housing. So they purchased more and more houses, and the price of houses went up faster than the purchasing power, than the income, much faster than the income of the people. And now we are at a situation that is even worse than 2007, 2008. So houses are now, you need to work 8 full years to purchase a house. If you multiply by 10, this would mean that probably you would have to pay 80 years or so. You would have to work 80 years for your house, assuming you can set aside 10% of your annual income to pay back your loan, and not accounting for interest expenses. So this is a bad situation. That's why young people don't purchase houses anymore. It would be just a wealth transfer from the young to boomers that basically have purchased the houses here at these point in times. I mean, it was smart by boomers, nothing against boomers. I mean, I would have done the same, buying a house here at this point in times, right, when it's very affordable. But today it's just not affordable for the young generation. They just don't do it. And I don't think it's a very good idea for people to buy houses at these kind of expensive prices. Now it's getting even worse. At the same time all of this happens, we have AI disruption. And I say it's getting worse. What I mean is it's getting better for society, big picture, very big picture. If you zoom out enough, it's getting much better. AI is such a relief. It's the only relief we basically have, because technology is highly deflationary, so it can reduce practically the burden that is put upon us. If deflation makes everything less expensive, it actually can counter these negative trends, and it can counter the debt to GBT problem, right? So it's the only hope we have in a way, AI and technology. But still, for many in the transitional period that are on the right side of change, and this is like they would experience something like this: 40% of work, like of the working hours, work time, is under significant threat of being automated using LLMs. And this is only LLMs, large language models. I'm only talking about the language tasks. This study is done by ARK Invest or another like investment company or so. So it doesn't include generative AI, such as like graphics and stuff, right? So we would see probably a significant disruption of our work, and we all have to find new ways to contribute, to find new ways to create value in society. With AI exponentially improving every single task under the sun, there's nothing safe from AI. Even manual labor, that has been like surprisingly a very robust way to make your living, because the white collar job have been disrupted first by the generative AI revolution. Even manual labor is getting disrupted by, say, humanoid robots and stuff, right? So we are seeing across the board a huge disruption of labor, of work, and we should not focus on work too much. In fact, the only solution I see, and this is like my personal opinion now, from here on, like until now, it was just statistics. Now this is my own opinion. It's not financial advice, no advice whatsoever. I think most people are screwed. Most people are plainly screwed, and the only hope they have is a strategy similar to this one I propose here. And it's a radical strategy. It needs a lot of effort, and it's not a guaranteed way, but it's the best opportunity of saving oneself and moving from the wrong to the right side of change by becoming an investor instead of a worker bee. And so how do you do this? Basically, same strategy as before. We use our savings to purchase assets, right? But we go now from a 3% savings rate to a 20% savings rate. And I can already hear you like complaining that you cannot actually increase your savings rate. It's very difficult to do and so on. And you're right, it's extremely difficult to do, especially considering that everything has become much more expensive. So probably this would but it's still under our control. So probably, I mean, we would have to do some sacrifices here. Maybe move to a different city or so where it's cheaper to live. So it's significant challenge, but it's doable. It's under our control, right? Why it's doable? Why do I say this? Because there is somebody making 80% of what you are making now, and this person also saves 3% on average. So this person can do it, so you can do it as well, right? So basically, what we have to do is go from 3% savings rate to 20%. This already improves things in the long term. Then go from 5% safe investment. So, for instance, buying government bonds or so, getting a 5% yield, to 15%. Now again, I can hear people complaining, right? It's very difficult to get to a 15% yield, but it's possible. And it's not impossible. And the people who remain on the right side of change will be the ones who actually went from a 5% to a 15% or higher investment yield annually. And for instance, we have seen the S&P 500. Most of the gains came from tech companies, not from the average company. The average company is actually like lost, right? If you exclude tech companies, have lost. So they didn't make any gains. All the gains have been made by the tech companies. So if you really find the right companies and also the right assets to invest in that remain on the right side of change, and this is basically the topic of the Finxter channel, so subscribe if you like to learn more about these topics. If you find them, you can actually get this type of yield. Even like simple place like Google or Amazon in the last 10 years have been making like 20% or so per year, right? So it's roughly, I don't even know the exact math, but I would say it's roughly right. So it's possible, right? And we would have, and if we actually want to counter this problem of getting squeezed, we would have to do something extreme like this. So we grow our savings from 3% to 20% radically. It's possible under our control. We go from safe investments to less safe investments, so at least S&P 500, maybe using some additional leverage, maybe only investing in disruptive tech companies, finding the winners, and so on, in order to increase the yield to a rate that is above the debasement rate, significantly above the debasement rate, so we can actually make progress towards our goals of becoming financially independent. These are tough things to do, and by no means will everybody be able to pull these kind of things off, but we need to do them if we want to be on the right side of change. And then in addition to that, we should not just remain an average worker, right? We should not remain average in our skills. We need to become above average. We need to become an above average AI native or AI engineer, right? And these are basically the skills we teach at the Finxter Academy. So you can check out academy.finxter.com, finxter.com. We have a lot of prompt engineering courses that teach you skills, the skills that are actually needed in tomorrow's marketplace to integrate AI with the real world, using AI APIs and harnessing the power of AIs in the real world, because businesses still pay a huge premium for AI engineers that are able to increase efficiency of their business processes using AI. So becoming an AI engineer means that you can actually find work for the next 20 years. Alternatively, if you don't want to learn these skills, maybe just become a government employee, because I think government employees will still have some work in 20 years. They will just print money to pay you. So these are two ways of actually surviving job-wise, in my opinion. But the two ways I see, there are more ways, but I don't see all ways. But the problem is that as a government employee, you probably cannot increase your income, so your household income would remain less. Okay, but if you made 75K, maybe you can pull it off making more than 100K, right? Maybe your wife or spouse, husband, depends, could also work or take a job. Maybe you could increase just your salary, become an AI engineer. Many of them making 150K, 200K per year, right? So there are ways of like making more than 100K. It's also under your control, and it's possible to do so. And on the Finxter channel and also in the Finxter Academy, we actually teach those skills that are needed. So check them out as well. So let's have an example. So if you just implement these 3 tips, these 3 strategies, all of them are hard and tough, but doable, right? If you would implement them, it would completely change the picture. Like this orange chart here at the bottom is actually the chart I showed before, this one, that the average person would not become financially free. So in 20 years, they would accumulate 120K in monetary units, US dollars or so, using the base assumption of saving only 3% in an S&P 500, 9% annual yield fund. The other chart actually shows what happens if you increase the salary, increase the savings rate, and increase the annual return to the numbers we have just outlined. Now we're talking about 3.3 million in net worth, which basically means even if you cut this in half twice, you would still be probably financially free. It would be enough to live off, right? And you would be on the right side of change, because the assets, because you have your investments in assets that benefit from change, that benefit from AI. And it's not a hard way, but this is the way to become financially independent, in my opinion. Not being a financial advisor, not giving you any tips or financial advice or so, just like sharing some first principles, just sharing statistics, like the first 10 slides, only raw statistics. Then I have one slide of assumptions. Now, these assumptions could be true, could be wrong, right? You could do them, you cannot do them. Some people actually surpass those assumptions, other people cannot implement those assumptions. And under those assumptions, I also give you the math, and the math looks like this. So, okay, this is everything. I think that's enough for today. Thanks for watching this video. I appreciate your time. I appreciate having you here. And yeah, let's talk soon. Bye.